I never thought a single phone call could destroy my relationship with my daughter forever. But sometimes, the choices we make with the best intentions become the very things that tear our families apart. My name is Margaret and I'm 67 years old. For 30 years I worked as a financial advisor helping families secure their futures. I thought I knew everything about making smart money decisions. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It all started 3 months ago when my daughter Sarah called me crying. She and her husband Mike had been trying to buy their first home for 2 years. Every time they found something they liked, they were outbid by cash offers or investors. The housing market was brutal and they were losing hope. "Mom, we've been saving every penny for 5 years," Sarah sobbed into the phone. "We have enough for a down payment, but these cash buyers keep swooping in. We're never going to own a home at this rate." My heart broke hearing the desperation in her voice. Sarah had always been responsible with money. She worked as a nurse, Mike was a teacher, and together they made a decent living. But in today's market, decent wasn't enough. That's when I made the decision that would haunt me forever. I had recently inherited my mother's house after she passed away. It was a beautiful Victorian home in a desirable neighborhood, worth about $800,000. I had been planning to sell it and split the money between my 2 children. But listening to Sarah's tears, I had what I thought was a brilliant idea. "Sweetheart, what if I gave you Grandma's house instead of selling it?" I said, trying to sound cheerful. "You and Mike could live there, and I'll give your brother his share of the inheritance in cash from my retirement savings." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for what felt like an eternity. "Mom, are you serious?" Sarah finally whispered. "Dead serious. That house should stay in the family anyway. Your grandmother would have wanted that." Sarah started crying again, but this time they were tears of joy. "Mom, I can't believe it. This is everything we've dreamed of." "Are you absolutely sure?" "I was sure. Or at least I thought I was." Within a week I had transferred the deed to Sarah and Mike. They moved in immediately, talking excitedly about their plans to renovate the kitchen and maybe start a family soon. I felt like the best mother in the world. I had solved my daughter's biggest problem and kept my mother's house in the family. What could possibly go wrong? I should have known that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. The first red flag should have been Mike's reaction when they moved in. While Sarah was over the moon, Mike seemed oddly quiet about the whole thing. When I asked him how he was settling in, he just nodded and said, "It's very generous of you, Margaret. Very generous." Something in his tone bothered me, but I brushed it off. Maybe he was just overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gift. After all, I had essentially given them $750,000. The second warning sign came from my financial advisor, Janet, who had been handling my investments for 15 years. "Margaret, I need to talk to you about this decision," she said during our monthly meeting. "You've just given away most of your net worth. Your retirement savings won't last as long as you think, especially with inflation and potential healthcare costs." I waved her concerns away. "Janet, I'm healthy as a horse. I've got plenty of money left, and seeing my daughter happy is worth more than any bank account. But what about long-term care? What if you need assisted living or medical care that Medicare doesn't cover? And you promised to give your son an equal inheritance. That's going to drain your savings significantly." I didn't want to hear it. In my mind, I was being the perfect mother, sacrificing for my children's happiness. Janet's practical concerns felt cold and calculated compared to the joy I had brought to Sarah's life. The third warning sign was the most obvious, but I was too proud to see it. My son David called me 2 weeks after I gave Sarah the house. "Mom, Sarah told me what you did. That's incredibly generous. But are you sure you can afford to give me an equivalent amount in cash? That's almost $400,000 we're talking about." "Of course I can afford it, honey. Don't worry about your old mother's finances." But privately I was starting to do the math. My retirement savings were substantial but not unlimited. After giving David his share, I would have significantly less than I'd planned to live on. Still, I reasoned I had Social Security, a small pension, and I lived simply. How much could I possibly need? The fourth warning sign came from Sarah herself, though I didn't recognize it at the time. She started calling me less frequently. When she did call, she seemed distracted, stressed about something she wouldn't discuss. I assumed it was just the normal stress of moving and settling into a new home. "How's the house treating you, sweetheart?" I would ask. "It's fine, Mom. Everything's fine," she would reply, but her voice lacked the enthusiasm she'd had when she first moved in. Looking back, I realized Sarah was probably starting to understand the true weight of what I had given them. She was beginning to see the strings attached to my generosity, even though I hadn't intended there to be any. The final warning sign came from Mike's mother, who cornered me at a family gathering. "Margaret, Mike told me what you did for them. That's wonderful, but I hope you know what you're getting into. Gifts like that, they come with expectations whether you mean them to or not." I laughed off her comment, but her words stuck with me. What expectations? I hadn't set any expectations. I had simply given my daughter a house because I loved her and wanted her to be happy. But as the weeks passed, I started to notice small things. Sarah would mention repairs the house needed, and I found myself offering to pay for them. When they talked about renovations, I caught myself suggesting which improvements would be best. Without realizing it, I was treating the house like it was still partially mine. And maybe deep down I felt like it was. 3 months after I gave Sarah the house, my carefully constructed world came crashing down in a single afternoon. It started with a phone call from my doctor's office. "Mrs. Patterson, we need to discuss your test results. Can you come in this week?" The tone in the nurse's voice made my stomach drop. I had gone in for what I thought was a routine checkup, but apparently my blood work had revealed something concerning. Dr. Martinez didn't beat around the bush when I saw him 2 days later. "Margaret, your kidney function has declined significantly since your last visit. We need to start monitoring this closely and consider treatment options." The words hit me like a physical blow. Kidney disease. Potential dialysis. Possible transplant. The medical bills alone could be astronomical, and I had just given away most of my financial safety net. But that was only the beginning of my nightmare. That same week, I received a letter from the IRS. In my eagerness to help Sarah, I had completely forgotten about the tax implications of gifting property worth $800,000. The annual gift tax exclusion was only $17,000. I owed tens of thousands of dollars in gift taxes that I hadn't budgeted for. I sat in my kitchen staring at the letter, feeling like the walls were closing in around me. How had I been so foolish? I had spent 30 years advising other people about their finances, and I had made one of the most basic mistakes possible. That evening I called Janet, my financial advisor. "I need to see you immediately," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. When I explained my situation, Janet's face went pale. "Margaret, this is exactly what I was afraid of. Between the gift taxes, your reduced retirement savings, and now potential medical expenses, you're looking at a serious financial shortfall." She pulled up my accounts on her computer and started running calculations. The numbers were devastating. Even if I lived modestly, I would likely run out of money within 10 to 15 years. If I needed long-term care, it could be much sooner. "What are my options?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Janet sighed deeply. "Honestly, your best option might be to ask Sarah to sell the house and give you back enough money to secure your retirement. I know that's not what you want to hear, but it might be necessary." The thought of asking Sarah to give back the house made me physically ill. How could I take away the home I had given her with such love and joy? How could I admit that I had made such a catastrophic mistake? But as the days passed and more bills arrived, I realized I might not have a choice. The gift taxes alone were going to wipe out a significant portion of my remaining savings. And my kidney disease was progressing faster than expected. I spent sleepless nights agonizing over what to do. I had intended to give my daughter the gift of security, but instead, I had created a situation where I might become a financial burden on her family. 2 weeks later, I finally worked up the courage to call Sarah and ask if we could talk. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number. "Mom, what's wrong? You sound terrible," she said as soon as she heard my voice. "Sarah, honey, I need to discuss something important with you and Mike. Can I come over this weekend?" There was a pause. "Is everything okay?" "We'll talk when I see you," I said, unable to bring myself to explain over the phone. That weekend drive to Sarah's house felt like the longest journey of my life. I had rehearsed what I would say 100 times, but I still had no idea how to tell my daughter that her dream home might need to become her nightmare. I'll never forget the look on Sarah's face when I finished explaining my situation. We were sitting in the living room of what used to be my mother's house, the same room where I had played as a child and later brought Sarah to visit her grandmother. Sarah stared at me for a long moment, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally something that looked like betrayal. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said, her voice eerily calm. You gave us this house without thinking about taxes, without considering your own financial future, and without consulting anyone who might have warned you about the consequences. Mike was sitting beside her, his face growing redder by the minute. I could see him struggling to control his temper. Sarah, I thought I was doing the right thing, I said, my voice breaking. I wanted to help you, to make your dreams come true. By making a decision that could force us to sell the house we just moved into? The house we've already started renovating? The house where we were planning to start our family. Sarah's voice was rising now, tears streaming down her face. Mike finally spoke, and his words cut me deeper than anything Sarah had said. Margaret, do you have any idea what this has done to us? We quit looking for houses because we thought our housing situation was settled. We used our down payment savings to renovate the kitchen. Sarah turned down a promotion that would have required relocating because we thought we had found our forever home. The weight of what I had done began to truly sink in. It wasn't just about the money or the taxes. I had disrupted their entire life plan based on a decision I hadn't thought through properly. And now, Mike continued, his voice shaking with anger, you're telling us that we might have to sell this house to save your retirement? Do you understand that we'll lose money on the renovations we've done? Do you realize that the housing market has gotten even worse since we moved in here? Sarah was sobbing now. Mom, how could you do this to us? How could you be so careless with something so important? I tried to explain about my health concerns, about the tax bills I hadn't anticipated, about how sorry I was for not planning better. But every word I spoke seemed to make things worse. You harmed our future. Sarah finally exploded, standing up and pointing at me with a shaking finger. You made us dependent on a gift you couldn't afford to give. You made us feel secure when we weren't. You made us make decisions based on false information. Mike stood up beside her, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. This isn't just about the house, Margaret. This is about trust. How are we supposed to believe anything you tell us going forward? How are we supposed to make plans when you've shown us that your promises aren't reliable? I never meant for this to happen, I whispered, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my life. But it did happen, Sarah said, wiping her eyes. And now we have to figure out how to fix the mess you created. We have to decide whether to sell the house we love and start over from scratch, or keep it and worry every day about whether you're going to ask for it back when your money runs out. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the room where my mother had raised me, where I had brought my own children to visit, where I had hoped Sarah and Mike would raise their children. Now it felt like a mausoleum of broken dreams and shattered trust. What do you want us to do, Mom? Sarah asked, her voice hollow with exhaustion. That was the question I had been dreading. Because the truth was, I didn't know. I had created a situation where any solution would cause pain. If they kept the house, I faced potential poverty in my old age. If they sold it, they would suffer financial losses and have to start their home buying journey over in an even worse market. I don't know, I admitted. I honestly don't know. Mike shook his head in disgust. Well, you better figure it out fast, Margaret. Because we're not going to spend the rest of our lives cleaning up your mistakes. As I drove home that night, I realized that in trying to give my daughter everything, I had instead given her the one thing no parent ever wants to give their child. A problem with no good solution. The weeks following that devastating confrontation were the darkest of my life. Sarah and Mike stopped returning my calls. My son David, when he learned what had happened, was furious with me for putting his sister in such an impossible position. I felt like I had single-handedly destroyed my family with one well-intentioned but catastrophically poorly planned decision. I was sitting in my kitchen one morning, staring at yet another medical bill when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Mike standing there, looking exhausted but determined. We need to talk, he said simply. I invited him in, expecting another confrontation. Instead, Mike sat down across from me and pulled out a folder full of documents. Sarah and I have been talking to financial planners, lawyers, and real estate agents for the past 3 weeks, he said. We think we've found a solution, but it's going to require all of us to make sacrifices. I held my breath as he explained their plan. They would sell my mother's house, but instead of me taking back the full value, we would split the proceeds 3 ways. 1/3 would go to securing my long-term care and medical expenses, 1/3 would go to Sarah and Mike as their share of the inheritance, and 1/3 would go to David as his equal share. But that means you'll get much less than the house was worth, I said. Mike nodded. Yes, but it also means we'll have enough for a down payment on a house we can actually afford in a price range that makes sense for our income. And you'll have enough money to handle your medical expenses and taxes. What about all the money you put into renovations? We'll lose some of it, he admitted. But we've learned that we can't make financial decisions based on gifts that might not be sustainable. We need to build our life on our own foundation. Sarah appeared in the doorway then, looking older than her 32 years. Mom, I want you to know that we don't hate you. We know you were trying to help. But Mike is right. We need to build our security ourselves. Over the next few months, we executed their plan. The house sold for $820,000, and after real estate fees, we each received about $265,000. It was enough for me to pay the gift taxes, set aside money for medical expenses, and still have a modest but secure retirement. Sarah and Mike found a smaller house in a different neighborhood. It wasn't as grand as my mother's Victorian, but it was theirs, purchased with their own money and their own careful planning. The most important thing I learned from this experience wasn't about money or taxes or real estate. It was about the difference between helping and enabling, between generosity and control, between good intentions and good decisions. I had thought I was being the perfect mother by solving my daughter's problems for her. Instead, I had robbed her of the satisfaction of solving them herself. I had thought I was securing her future, but I had actually made it more uncertain. True generosity, I learned, isn't about giving people what you think they need. It's about supporting them as they work to get what they need themselves. It's about being a safety net, not a shortcut. Today, Sarah and I have rebuilt our relationship, though it took time and several difficult conversations. She and Mike are proud homeowners who earned their house through their own hard work and careful saving. And I've learned to ask for advice before making major decisions, no matter how good my intentions might be. The most painful lesson of all? Sometimes the people who love us most are the ones we hurt the deepest, simply because we think love alone is enough to make our decisions wise. It isn't. Love without wisdom can be just as destructive as indifference without cruelty. If you're a parent reading this, please learn from my mistake. Support your children's dreams, but don't try to hand them those dreams on a silver platter. The struggles they overcome themselves will serve them far better than any gift you could ever give them. And if you're planning to make a major financial decision based on emotion, so take a breath. Consult experts. Think through all the possible consequences. Because sometimes, the road to hell really is paved with the very best of intentions.